NMC, the Nursing Midwifery Council, and I'm also a doctoral student. I'm in my 5th year, hopefully final year, of doing a professional doctorate in nursing, and my research study is exploring professional enjoyment in nursing and the factors that enhance and diminish it.
Thank you, Sam. So I suppose the first thing that I really want to ask you is how you came up with that topic, the idea of nurses' enjoyment of nursing.
So at the time, so this was 6 years ago, I was in a senior policy role working with the Chief Nurse of Health Education England. And I was travelling up and down the country because I led the development of the nursing associate role for Health Education England. And as I was travelling up and down the country, the media were talking about nurses being on their knees and using really sort of combative language like front line, and all these nurses are leaving. But I kept meeting nurses that were really enjoying the profession and they really loved what they did. And I'm not ashamed to say, but I was sitting in the hot tub with my best friends, who are all still nurses that I trained with at Barts. And we were drinking champagne. And I said, it's really funny, isn't it? Because we all still love nursing, but we all are in really different roles, but we're still in nursing. And we trained, quite a long time ago. So what is it that actually keeps us enjoying nursing? And then I had a conversation with the professor, academic professor of nursing, who is a fantastic woman. And I said to her, I think this would be something that we should commission as some research, because if we can find out why nurses enjoy nursing, then maybe we can look at trying to stop people leaving. So maybe it can help us with the retention strategy, because the nursing workforce shortage is it's not unique to our borders, it's a global problem. So maybe this is something that could be really useful. And she said to me, well, why don't you not commission this research, but why don't you do it yourself and do it as a PhD or a doctorate? And I thought, oh, crikey, that's a challenge. So I'd done my master's, and I thought, well, I'm not sure about that, about whether that's, I don't know if I feel research ready, and I'd only known about a PhD, and the PhD is where you kind of just start off on your own, or you do some commissioned research. And then I spoke to a university dean, and she said that they were about to start a professional doctorate in nursing. And this is where you start as a cohort together. And the first couple of years really get you research ready. So you do different research modules and you develop your idea, and then you're off out with your supervisory team and you're doing your research. And I thought, well, actually, that would really suit me. That would suit, because it will help me get into that place of feeling ready to do the research myself. So I spoke to my family and my children, my husband, because I was already working full time in a really full-on job, and said, I'm thinking about doing my doctorate. All of my friends and family generally said, you're absolutely mad. You have no spare time. I was also I'm manager of an under-18 girls rugby team, so life's busy. But I spoke to my family and they said, well, why don't you just start it? This is for you. It sounds a great research, and then if it's too much, you can stop. So that's where the concept came from. And actually over time it's become more and more important, because the NMC register has now got 758,000 nurses and midwives on it in England, nursing associates, but we've got more nurses and midwives leaving every year than we had before. So we really need to find out what helps people enjoy nursing and what stops them enjoying nursing. So it's the research, to me, is important research.
I'm really interested in how it sounds like it was both a professional interest and also your own, like you being a nurse is a key part of this, isn't it? Like this was about you and your friends. Of course you enjoy nursing when you're sitting in a hot tub sipping champagne, but it's a really interesting kind of motivation for doing the research, because you're sort of like invested right from the beginning then, I guess.
Absolutely.
So you said you'd done a master's, so you'd had a little bit of exposure to kind of the different approaches that you might take and the different research methods. could you talk a little bit about how you kind of refined that and kind of came up with your actual question? And then, sorry to do multiple questions, but how you came up with the question and then how you kind of decided what would fit in terms of the method that you'd take and the sort of theoretical framework for that.
Well, the first thing I did was to look at the literature to see actually what was around about professional enjoyment. And I started to see that there was a lot of literature on job satisfaction, on intention to leave, reasons why people leave the profession. But there was a real dearth of literature on actual enjoyment or professional enjoyment in nursing. So that made me start thinking that I need to explore it as a concept. What is professional enjoyment? Has it actually been defined? And then what I wanted to do is then test that out on a bigger audience. So I started to work with the idea that I would look at a mixed method study. So mixed methods is very much in the kind of pragmatism field. And I'm a really pragmatic person. I'm not wedded to a particular approach. And often you get sucked into the philosophical assumptions of research. And it feels like a world of different words and language that is just you can't approach. But actually pragmatism meant sense to me because you find the best method for your research topic. And I thought, well, what I need to do is talk to nurses about this. So do a qualitative approach, explore it, and then develop a survey, and then survey many more nurses and actually see whether we can test out this in a quantitative way. So that was the approach I was going to take. And I had a really great dinner one evening, and I was very lucky in the job I was in. I was very in this sort of senior policy role, so I had access to a lot of people. And I had dinner with some nurse academics one evening it was in Manchester actually, and I talked to them about my study and how I was going to approach it. And they all got really animated and they were saying, oh no, I'd do it this way, or I'd do case study, or I'd do, and it made me realise that there's more than one way to skin a cat. And what I had to do is think about how would I like to approach this, because this is my research at the end of the day. And actually I'm paying for this, that I was sponsored for a couple of years, but I'm also paying for it now. So that was the idea. I was going to do mixed methods, qualitative arm first, then the quantitative, but you have to merge the data at some point. Then my supervisory team had took me out for coffee and had a long conversation with me about the fact that I am just one researcher and this is my doctoral research. It's not going to change the world, and I will only have limited time. And so what I've decided to do is, rather than try and validate a tool that I would then use for the quantitative arm of the research, is that I went down the exploratory qualitative focus of the study. Now, my study, again, I struggle with this a little bit because it doesn't fit into any of the traditional qualitative boxes. It's not a case study. It's not phenomenology. It's not any of these boxes that you think, oh, it's that. It is just a pure exploratory qualitative approach using semi-structured interviews. So that's the approach I took, because I wanted to explore nurses' experience of professional enjoyment rather than go in with a particular focus.
Yeah, you didn't have a particular need to develop a theory or look at lived experience. So originally you thought that the analysis of the interview data would be used to develop some kind of enjoyment tool that would then be the quantitative arm, and then quite rightly your supervisors reminded you that you have a life outside a PhD, so you went for the qualitative exploratory approach. So what was your kind of final question, if you like what was the kind of I suppose the working title at that point?
So the working title was what is nurses' experience of professional enjoyment in nursing, and what factors enhance and diminish professional enjoyment?
Okay.
And that guided my questions. Now, as we talk today, I'm deep in the analysis of my data. I used Twitter as a recruitment tool.
Yes, I saw it.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh. And I had an amazing response. Now, please, think about the context. I went out just after the third wave of COVID to recruit nurses for this study. And I did pause my recruitment because times were really difficult from the 4 months before my Twitter advert were really challenging in regards to COVID. We had a new strain of COVID, and I was a deputy chief nurse at the time, and it was a really challenging time, and I didn't want to ask nurses to talk about enjoyment when they really struggled. However, I did go back to ethics and add a question in to my study which could specifically ask, has COVID impacted your professional enjoyment of nursing? And the provisional data that I've got from that question is fascinating, because I think the assumptions will be yes, negatively, but that wasn't what I heard from everyone. There were some really freeing times around the pandemic when people could rip up the rule book and be autonomous and make decisions quickly. And also the camaraderie of being the only ones allowed out. So there was a lot in that. But there were also some nurses in academic positions or in non-clinical roles that felt that they wished that they could be in clinical roles at the time, and that was difficult for them. So there's some really lovely data that's coming through there.
Really fascinating, extra unanticipated. Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I'm in an academic role, but I went back into practice, and I absolutely relate to that camaraderie and the sort of the tearing up the rule book, for sure, the freedom of it. So wow, so how many nurses have you kind of completed the interviews? How many were in your sample?
Yeah, so I had 267 nurses asked to be part of the study. I know. I had to close it within 3 days of the advert going out. Amazing. I then I filtered it down because I wanted nurses from across all 4 fields and across all sectors and settings. So I have interviewed a lot. I interviewed 25 nurses, so I've got a lot of data, but they are from all 4 fields. They vary in tenure in the profession. So some nurses, or a couple of nurses that are under 1 year qualified and up to 42 years qualified, because I wanted to see whether tenure makes a difference for enjoyment. And then in different sectors and settings, so hospice, social care, nursing home, criminal justice system, acute hospital, learning disability. So all sectors and settings, universities are covered in those 25 nurses.
I think that's really fascinating, because when you talked earlier on about the motivation being some of how things are portrayed in the media, that is often very much acute hospital focused. And I think people forget about the kind of the breadth of experiences in nursing. And actually, even within a hospital, there are differences between wards, differences between settings. So you had a sample, and then you kind of purposively narrowed that down to 25. Yeah. And was the 25 a pragmatic decision, or were you guided by any kind of sample size, quality thoughts?
My sample was going to be 20 to 25 because to get people across all 4 fields and that breadth, I knew I needed to go a bit bigger than often a qualitative study will source. 25 was my maximum, just for the fact that this is doctoral research and it's just me. But I went up to the 25. But going back to your previous point, there are a couple of studies that explore enjoyment in nursing, but they tend to be, the ones that I did find at the time were in acute settings, and I was really keen not to be blocked into that. And one of the outcomes I think that will come from the research is we don't talk enough about the career opportunities that nurses have, because the first question I asked them was, can you tell me about your career so far? and the opportunities that we have within our profession are phenomenal.
They really are. Yeah, absolutely. So you've done those, you've transcribed them, and now you're deep in analysis. I suppose we don't have your kind of like your final thoughts, your final synthesis yet. But could you give kind of, I mean, you've already mentioned the sort of impact of COVID in various ways, but are there any other kind of 2 or 3 other points that you're finding again and again that kind of transcend fields, or anything in particular that you think is really resonant or surprising?
There's a lot coming through that does transcend fields. So nurses' enjoyment of connecting with others, us being a social tribe, and having that connection. Nurses' enjoyment about making a difference. Now, whether that's with a patient, whether it's with families, whether it's about inequalities in health. So the nurses from the learning disability and mental health background particularly talked about that, about being able to be that advocate as well. Nurses enjoying other people valuing them and that autonomy of decision making, especially as they become more senior and expert in their field. And on the diminishing side, unsurprisingly, leadership, culture, so poor leadership, culture, and sometimes nurses diminishing other nurses' enjoyment by not enabling them, not supporting them, not developing them. But some real positivity around that kind of enabling others, connection, learning, supporting the new nurses coming through. So yes, I'm in that. I've coded everything. I've got Post-it notes everywhere. I'm in the thematic phase. I love it. When I'm in it, I love it. Is it stressful doing this on top of a, I've got a pan UK job? Yes, it is. But what keeps me going, and this would be my advice to anyone doing research, whether it's undergraduate, master's or doctorate, is pick something that really gets you, that gets you fired up, because that energy will be the bit that keeps you going when it's tough. So find something that's spiky and that you like and enjoy and you think will make a difference, not just for the world, but for you, you're invested in.
Thank you so much. I think you've absolutely found the topic that suits you. It makes absolute sense. I would really be interested in finding out what your kind of like final, your final findings, if you like, and your recommendations. So if it's okay with you, I'll put a link to your Twitter feed for the students to access, and then hopefully as you start to produce publications we can keep up to date. And I love that you're doing this study. I love that it's a positive spin on nursing. I really think, why on earth hasn't that been done already? It's one of those that just makes so much sense to me. And I think you're absolutely the right person to take it on and fly with it. So
thank you. And if you ever want me to come and talk to the students, Laura, I'm more than happy. I often do a sort of leadership talk with students and a bit about the NMC now, but also about the study, but also about kind of keeping you as a nurse in the profession.
I would absolutely love that. I'm going to stop the recording now.